Hi, I'm Becky Parker Geist. I am the host of the Audiobook Connection podcast, Behind the Scenes with the Creative Teams. I'm also president of Bay Area Independent Publishers Association and the CEO of Pro Audio Voices, providing audiobook and podcast production, distribution, and marketing. And I am excited to have with me today Robert E. Cook, author of The Mahdi, a techno-national security thriller produced as a full-cast audiobook, and it is the fourth book in the Cooch series of national security thrillers. So, Bob, welcome.
Thank you, Becky.
That's so good to be with you today. So tell us a little bit about your background. You've got this this series of national security thrillers. Tell us a little bit about, what led you to start writing this particular series and this kind of content?
Well, my wife and I were on a cruise in Vietnam, and we left Saigon and we're heading north to Da Nang and got into 60-foot seas and 40-knot winds across the bow of typhoon.
Wow.
And everybody was sick except me. So I got out my computer and started writing a novel.
Amazing.
And that was the first one.
Wow. And how did you, what kind of research did you find yourself delving into as you moved forward with your series?
There's a lot of really good research available on the internet if you know how to look for it. Mm-hmm. And so I would go to Wikipedia, I'd Google different terms, and I ended up deciding that if there were going to be more, then it would be handy to have a connection into the Middle Eastern world. That means you have to have a Muslim there someplace. Mm-hmm. And so his mother is a Bedouin, married to a U.S. Marine. And that sort of put it all together. And I did the research, and there was less research in the first one than there were in the next three.
And so when you, what kind of career did you have leading up to this point where you started writing on the high seas?
I was, before that, I had been a software executive, had started 3 different companies and taken them public, and then finally retired. And it was 3 years after I retired that I got into this typhoon. So it seemed like an opportune time.
Yeah. And you chose this particular region, a particular set of complicated political issues and challenges. What was it that attracted you to that particular set of problems and part of the world?
The complexity of being a Muslim, especially in the Middle East, was very interesting to me. And the way we treated them was very interesting to me. So I thought that I could create a lens of a Bedouin American protagonist that would give a different view, a different look to the novels. And that really got the whole thing going.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you always enjoy as a reader or audiobook listener? Have thrillers been an area or a genre that have been of particular interest to you?
I've always been a big thriller fan, from Tom Clancy back in the old days to, through Lee Child and a bunch of other writers, who, as well as I do. Yeah. The best-selling thrillers, I read them all.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And then, so in the first books of the series, what led you to this particular fourth book? Did you feel like let me ask this first. The first 3 books, would you consider them standalone books?
Well, they're part of a series, but I try to make them standalone. Mm-hmm. And the first book was about druggies in California, and it wasn't all that oriented to Islam and being a Muslim. His father won the Medal of Honor in Vietnam and was in a wheelchair, and I had him get in trouble in high school, so they put him in the Marine Corps. And then another one of the lead players, McMillan, got him out of the Marine Corps, put him into special operations at CIA, and it sort of all came together. The second book was set in Yemen, and there was a lot going on in Yemen, and it seemed to me that would be a reasonable base for my key player, Kuhulan, to start to work. And so that involved a nerve gas attack on the football playoff game in Dallas. And he foiled that, of course. And I had him speak a lot of languages. He speaks fluent Spanish because his mother taught in Algeciras. He speaks fluent Arabic because he went every summer to his grandfather's home in Tangier. And it was easy to sort of put it all together from there.
Yeah, nice. And so clearly you have some, some threads in the, in the military, in terms of bringing in different military aspects, into the stories. Did you serve in the military yourself?
I did. I was in for 5.5 years and spent a year in Vietnam. And I was interested in, I thought I was going to stay. My first wife didn't think so. And turned out she was right. I had done quite a bit of work in tactics and strategy and gone to Command and General Staff College. So you get a pretty good sense of what you'd like to know and what you don't need to know.
Yeah.
And it was useful in creating that kind of backdrop for the novels.
Yeah. And then have you enjoyed writing, just the process of writing for most of your life, or where did that interest begin?
I had done a fair number of articles for my software career in different technical magazines, but you sort of get used to it, and you learn to throw out the words you don't need and keep the ones you do need, make them a little better. Yeah. And the whole thing was an interesting drill. And then when I was stuck in the ocean, it came back to me, and I started just to structure and outline a whole new thing, a thriller.
Yeah. Now, did you, when you were writing the Mahdi, did you map it out, the story in advance? Did it sort of form in your head and then you just started writing? I'm always so interested in how stories come to authors, because each author has their own unique way that they come. What was yours?
Well, there's been a long time between my novels, so I had plenty of time to figure out what I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. In this case, I was in February of 18. I was reading an article in The Economist about Israel was confiscating Israeli citizens' land who happened to be Muslim because they weren't Jewish.
Right.
And the U.S. had gone against it. The International Criminal Court had ruled against it. Everybody and their brother has ruled against it. And Israel said tough, which they're saying right now.
Right.
And so I said, maybe there's a book there for me. Mm-hmm. So you set your alerts and you start to read. And the more I read, the more it seemed that there was a novel there. And I'm pretty happy with it. Yeah. Israel's played right along.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great. It's a great novel. And we're going to dive a little deeper just a little later. I want to ask you some questions specifically about the audiobook process. But there is something that you have shared that I want to delve into a little bit. And you've said that that in your experience so far with this particular book, that there's been a kind of knee-jerk reaction in reading it that the Mahdi is anti-Semitic, and yet after just a few minutes of discussion with someone who expresses that they come around. Tell us a little bit more about why you think you get that initial reaction, and also what it is that demonstrates that it is not anti-Semitic.
It's interesting because I have several very good friends who are Jewish who had that knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
And it ended up with them saying, never again. And so they think you can't let the camel's nose under the tent. And so we will never have that kind of devastation that you found in the Holocaust. And when you say, wait a minute, what I'm doing is doing a logical case of the way Israel makes its future stay solid. And there is no future in Israel becoming a Jewish theocracy. It's too small, it's not mighty enough. And there are 200 million Muslims on your next door neighbors. And that makes it very difficult. And when they looked at the arguments where I tried to include not only the liberal Muslim, and there are a lot of nuts in liberal Muslims, as everybody's aware,
yeah, sure.
but I tried to include the liberal Jews. And there are a lot of liberal Jews. The whole diaspora in New York is basically liberal.
Right.
But they have that knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
And so you just have to talk your way around it.
Yeah, I think I think you make this clear, as does, the news in many ways, about how also it seems like what you're framing and showing is how, that never again is not just for the Jewish people, but also for every other grouping of people. We can group ourselves in any number of ways, by any number of characteristics, not necessarily religious or anything else, but, with the Palestinian people being, in a place akin to what the Jewish people were experiencing in the Holocaust. Does that sound like an accurate statement?
Well, never again is sort of a slogan, an aphorism that has evolved since World War II, when they managed to slaughter 10 million of them with no reason. Right. And the rest of them were upset, and I don't blame them. But the key for me is, how do you maintain a 50-year horizon or a 10-year horizon? And they're in danger. The Israelis are in danger of falling into Thucydides' trap, which is, Thucydides was general in the Peloponnesian Wars. And when Sparta saw that Athens was coming up to be a threat, they attacked him. And Israel's in that boat because their lead is in technology and communications. And they are a military hegemon, but they are not a thought leader in the eyes of the Islam nations around the world. And of course, the Jews have been prosecuted over the years, persecuted from way back. But the way I ended the Mahdi was with Israel being the intellectual and technology leader of the Middle East, bring the Middle East up to current standards. They were going to build the schools, build the hospitals, build the universities. And I had Saudi Arabia, US, and Israel splitting the cost. Of course, that's my novel. That was fiction. It hasn't turned out quite that way. And there's a fair amount of slugging it out going on.
Yeah.
And right now, Israel's right on top of it all because of their technical and communications expertise. That won't last forever. So if they win this one and slaughter another million Palestinians, that just means there's still 2 billion Muslims left in the world to be angry. And you don't want that when the gap's going to close in technology the way Thucydides said it would.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us more about the Thucydides trap?
Well, yeah, I'm a Machiavelli fan, and that's hard for people to believe. But he studied Thucydides and the way it worked. And Machiavelli, by the way, is sort of one of the military thought leaders of the 15th century, because he invented the militia that defends the homeland. Before he started figuring that out, everybody hired mercenaries. And if you're the mercenary and you don't get paid as much as the guy next door, you go over next door and join that guy. And so that wasn't a wonderful way to run a railroad. And he figured it out. He also studied when Sparta Sparta won that war with Athens, but they ended up not because time took over and Athens continued to grow, just as Islam will continue to grow. There are 2 billion people around the world, B word, billion. There's 6 million, M word, Israelis in a country the size of New Jersey. That just doesn't last unless you get on board and play the game. And Thucydides said that it's only a matter of time. And that trap is closing every year. And you can see that. Iran is next door to having a nuclear weapon. That will change the game. Israel's nuclear hegemony dominates the Middle East.
I'm really interested in these kinds of conversations, partly because I will frankly admit that I have known very little about the history of that region, and it's been way outside my area of expertise. So I'm fascinated by these kinds of conversations because they stir up the conversation. They stir up the dialogue around what's happening. And what I've found, and we've been producing several audiobooks that are more where there are more political components or historical, political, sociological components. And I find that for myself, this is a big, there's a lot of learning that's going on. And so I really enjoy having these kind of conversations and learning and just even having my my thoughts, sort of challenging me, I guess is what I would say.
I hope to create that same sort of mystery that can be answered in the reader that I go after. And the conversation is one that people don't think about that much. But if you can structure it so much that they're willing to look at it, there's a lot of information there. And looking into Islam and understanding the religion is interesting for a good Lutheran boy like me. But I don't have a dog in this fight. I just want to have the conversation.
Yeah.
I want to have a thoughtful conversation about what makes sense for a huge population in the world that's underserved.
Yeah, that's great. Let's take a short pause and we're going to come right back and talk about the audiobook.
Okay.
From IPPY Gold Medal winner Robert Cook comes the 4th installment in the Cooch series. With all the classic elements of a spy thriller, intrigue, violence, sex, the Mahdi is a narrative geopolitical battlefield where Islamic and Jewish ideologies clash, seen through the lens of a modern liberal Muslim. Raised in a blend of Bedouin tradition and Western education, Alex Kahulin, Cooch, is a former U.S. Marine, CIA operator, and entrepreneur. Partnered with Dr. Caitlin O'Connor, the self-described smartest person in the world, they make an unlikely yet formidable duo. When Alex takes on a mission to reclaim stolen Bedouin land, he finds himself imprisoned and branded a criminal. Meanwhile, Caitlin faces her own dangers, becoming the target of an extremist plot. But the rules of warfare change forever when Caitlin condenses an electromagnetic pulse into shootable ammunition and deploys an AI chatbot quantum computer that can use the internet to control secure Israeli communications and provide strategic intel. As tensions escalate, some begin to believe that Alex may actually be the Mahdi, the prophesied redeemer of Islam. But can he shoulder that mantle? And can technology and enlightened thinking prevail over entrenched dogma? Get your copy of The Mahdi today at Amplify Audiobooks. So tell us why you chose to approach the audiobook as a full cast kind of project?
I tried to envision, when I was talking to Pro Audio Voices, I tried to envision one person doing the whole book or two, and it just didn't work. It's a complex set of characters. And in the case of an African American, you go after a guy who sounds like he's African American. That's a distinct accent, except among the top of the intellectual heap, where they fake a normal accent like the rest of us. And otherwise, you can hear it in tone. And it turns out that person has to serve a number of roles. But I can't imagine that one voice being more than a few characters, because you can only change the voice so much. In the case of one of the key players was the head of Mossad is a woman named, doesn't matter what her name was, but I had established a connection with Mossad in the second and third books, so it was easy to roll into it. But she had an accent that made her sound like she was a Jewish intellectual. I mean, she knew about Thucydides, she knew about Machiavelli. They both studied the same people.
Yeah.
And so you talk to the casting people at Pro Audio Voices, and they served up a lot of different voice sets. Of course, I never saw any faces, didn't matter.
Right.
And I tried to figure out how the woman that played, and you may be comfortable with this, the woman that played the head of Mossad played a number of other parts with different accents, only one of which was a U.S. accent.
All right.
And she did that well. Thank you for that. But the casting was what really made me pick a large full cast audience rather than a smaller number, cheaper operation. If I'm going to do this, I want to do it right. I want people to have a good time listening to the book and not have to worry too much about the cadence and the accents and so on.
Yeah. And just to circle back to something you had commented earlier, about a normal accent. And of course, each one of us has our own, to each of us, our own accent is the normal one, right? And so just using that as a way to also point out in the casting process that we're always doing our best to find people who actually are of the heritage or of the culture that is, where those characters are, of those characters. And there's a real challenge, and it's a challenge in the industry in general as well. When we have people who are playing multiple roles, they can only, sometimes you're using an accent that maybe isn't of your cultural heritage, and so trying to find that right balance between the best storytelling and appropriate accents and casting, with sort of honoring different cultures can be a challenging mix.
It's a matter of verisimilitude, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And I was amazed. Now, these narrators, at least the ones they got from Pro Audio Voices, they're all professional actors or very close to it, professional narrators.
Yep.
So they're used to the challenge of a slight difference in accent. Now, I can hear the difference between a Pittsburgh accent and a Cleveland accent. I work both places, you learn it. But most people can't.
Right.
And if there is an accent that is Middle Eastern in some way, you can pull it off for an Arab, for an Israeli, for almost anyone, as long as it's in that section. Mm-hmm. Now, if you want to go to Asia, that's a whole different set of accents, and that's harder. But there's the verisimilitude is shocking. Yeah. When you hear the pros go from one role to another, when one with foul language, another one is a pure thing.
Yeah, yeah. Is there anything, we know we've been talking about casting. Is there anything else or in particular about the process of producing the audiobooks so far, or the audiobook that has stood out to you so far? Again, we've talked about casting, but if there's anything else that maybe was surprising to you, or I always like to call out those kinds of things because we have a lot of listeners on our to our channel, our podcast, that are authors and are haven't had the experience of producing audio yet. So anything that jumps out at you?
I had never listened to a single audiobook
Mm-hmm.
before this one was produced. And I was amazed. This is pretty exciting. This book takes quite a while. And I could be writing a book and reading this book, riding a bicycle and reading this book kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just listen to it. And it doesn't take all your attention, but you get to rewind and listen to it again if you hear a section. You can't do that with a book very easily.
Right.
You don't want to go back and find a page where you thought you heard something. And so the putting together the people and the integration of all the different voices into a single tale, single story, was quite interesting, and it was very well done.
And how can our listeners learn more about you and your writing? What is your website?
RobertCookNovels.com. So it's all one string, RobertCookNovels.com. And there's a fair amount of information there that on all four of the books. So you can get a summary of the Mahdi, which is a kid from North Carolina, ended up in Tangier running a war in Gaza. I mean, that's hard to do, but it's all there.
Yeah.
And it's fun. It's fun to write it. It was fun to listen to it. And I'm surprised. But I'm going to listen to more books now.
Great. And if you haven't gotten your copy yet of The Mahdi by Robert E. Cook, it, at the time of this, will go live. It will be available on Amplify audiobooks and will also become available on all other audiobook platforms. So, Bob, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Becky, for setting it up. It was fun.
Good.
Take care.
Thank you.